A very good day to all. And topic of discussion today is Jane Eyre. It's a novel written by Charlotte Bronte and it is written in 1847. It is set in northern England and in early 1800. This was Victorian period and the narrator of the novel is Jane herself who is narrating all these incident back 10 years after the events. Looking back at 10 years after the events, sorry. So author Charlotte Bronte published this novel under the pseudonym Currer Bell. So back then, it was not easier for women to publish novel, and the publishing novel was considered to a part of men's occupation, and publishing novel by females were not considered worthy or respectable. To avoid being diminished as a woman, writer. Her sister Emily and Anne also published as Ellis Bell and Acton Bell. Charlotte lost her mother at 5. Two sisters died at Har's boarding school. Experience clearly reflected in her novel, and and her brother also died of consumption. Back then, tuberculosis was called consumption. So, what is the historical context of this novel? Let's look at this historical context of the novel. The Victorian period brought sweeping changes: the British Empire abroad, the Industrial Revolution at home, and growing middle class. Women had severely limited status. Jane's struggle for economic and personal independence directly mirrors the real issues of class, gender, and education in 19th century Britain. So, Victorian period was sweeping with changes like Industrial Revolution was going on, and women were very limited with their status, and the women also want to gain the financial independence, economic independence. They want to get out from the grasp of man. So this novel reflects this, and this novel reflects the social freedom, the educational freedom, the financial freedom that Jane Eyre or that the protagonist Jane Eyre aspires in this novel. So does the Charlotte Bronte aspired in her life. And what is the central conflict of the novel? Let's look at the central conflict of the novel. The novel traces the Jane's lifelong quest to balance independence and love, passion and judgment, and her identity as a woman in a society that constantly tries to define her by her poverty, gender, and orphan status. And so, from the beginning of the novel, we see that the Jane is always disappointed by her status because she thinks he is low born, and she lives on the mercy of her aunt, Mrs. Reed. Her uncle has already died, and she lives on the mercy of Mrs. Reed because she thinks that devoid of this, she will be left alone in too much poverty, and she will beg. So to it's better to suffer some disadvantages and live their life, and all then she aspires to become free, and she aspires to become independent and educated. So let's move to the novel. Let's look the novel in detail. So 10-year-old Jane lives at the Gateshead Hall with her aunt Mrs. Reed and three cousins who treat her as a dependent, not a family member. Her cousin John Reed insult her openly. You have no business to take our books. You are a dependent. Mama says you have no money. You ought to beg. This establishes the class cruelty Jane will face throughout the novel. So Jane is an orphan. Her father and mother has already died, and the Bessie, the household, narrates the story how her father and mother died. So so when they passed away, she became the property of her aunt, and there she is not very there she is not treated well, and she gets into fight with her cousins like John Reed, and John Reed once complained with his mother, and she locks her in red room. When John knocks her down, Jen fights back, her first act of rebellion. As a punishment, Mr. Reed locks her in a red room. They lock her in a red room where her uncle Mr. Reed had died. Along with her reflection, Jane begins to realize what she deserves. The red room becomes a key symbol. It represents the society traps Jane by limiting her freedom due to her class, gender, and independent in spirit. So in red room, when her aunt locks her in the red room after she gets in fight with the her cousin John Reed, So she sees reflection of her uncle and she is very terrified by that. And when she tries to say that she is seeing ghost of her uncle, nobody believes her and she faints in the red room. Jean sees what she believes Mr. Reed's ghost and faints in terror. The local apothecary, Mr. Lloyd, later asks if she would like to attend school. So Jane always wanted to get educated, and so when she gets an opportunity, Mr. Reed also agrees, her aunt also agrees, because she want to get rid of her niece. So she sends him to the Lowood Institution. Now our protagonist moved to a school called Lowood Institution, and before leaving, Jane angrily confronts Mrs. Reed, calling her a cruel and deceitful person. She feels as a narrator as if an invisible bond had burst and that I had struggled out into whooped for liberty. This is the first taste of speaking truth, but she must learn to balance passion with self-control. See what happens that when she meets the principal Lockhurst and of the institution, her aunt tries to say to the principal that don't trust her. उनको इसको बिल्कुल trust ना करिए, ये बहुत झूठ बोलती है. And in order to rebel for that, she tells that her aunt has always been bad to her. She treated her very badly, and she felt like what to say, दबी दबी सी अपने घर में रहती थी वो, अपने आंट के यहाँ. So, Lovett क्या है? Lovett is a charity school for orphan girls run by the hypocritical Mr. Brocklehurst, a clergyman who preaches self-denial and starvation while his own family lives in luxury. He would stare the body to save the soul, but does not practice what he preaches. Bronte uses Lowood to satirize the real condition in girls' charity schools of the era. Two of her sisters died in one. So, there the school is by a clergyman and who live lavishly while the students are made to suffer. Bronte uses law to satirize the real condition of the girls in the charity school in the era. Two of her sisters died in one. Okay, so one of the sister died in one. So she uses the real life personal setback in the novel. Jane forms two crucial friendships. याद रखने वाली बात है. Helen Burns, a deeply religious and intellectual orphan, teaches Jane to endure justice with patience and believe in a loving God and a beautiful afterlife. If the whole world hated you and believed you wicked, while your consciousness approved you, you would not you would not be without friend. And Helen is a Christ-like figure who bears suffering without complaint and died of tuberculosis. What happens that Helen is a very religious person, and when Jen asks that, you don't get bothered that you get so much beating from the school teacher, like one history teacher is there, you don't get bothered, how you can tolerate all of this? So what Helen replies that it's the life itself is very harsh, and I know that when I take a toil of suffering here, I will be good in heaven. मतलब वो ये कहती है कि अगर मैं यहाँ पे सफरिंग सहती हूँ तो मैं हेवन में जाके एक अच्छी लाइफ जीऊंगी. सो सी इज ए क्राइस्ट लाइक फिगर एंड ही देन एंड when this Mr. Brocklehurst come to in school and announces that don't believe what Jane says because she is a liar, she get very ashamed and she started to think that people in the school law would hate her, and everybody hates her. Then Helen Burns inform Jane that nobody hates you, they feel pity of you. So don't worry about that. And even if they hate you, don't worry about it. Take the toil, take the suffering. So what happens now? Mr. Maria Temple, the campus made superintendent act as a mother figure for both of these girls, like Helen and for Jane, providing food, kindness, and intellectual enrichment that Mr. Reed never gave. When Mr. Brocklehurst publicly humiliates Jane as a liar, Mr. Temple clears Jane's name by writing to Mr. Lloyd that this. So what Mr. Brocklehurst humiliates her. Then Mr. Temples writes to Mr. Lloyd, who sent her, on whose recommendation Jane comes finally to Lord. So he's a man of great respect. So he writes a letter back to the school that no, Jane is not liar. She is there out of her circumstances. Then everybody starts to believe her. This sister, who is hood of humanity, humility, persistent honesty, gave Jane a model for her own character. A typhus epidemic kills many students and exposes Brocklehurst negligence. New management improves the school, and new management now, Brocklehurst leaves after the typhus and epidemic, and new management comes and they balances it out. And Jane excels, graduates first in her class, and becomes a teacher herself. But when Mr. Temple marries and leaves, Jane feels orphaned again and yearns for freedom. I desired liberty. For liberty, I grasped. Mm, grant me at least a new servitude. Earlier, what happens that the Jane was not finding herself very intellectual, but Helen was very intellectual, and she and Mr. Maria discuss on the various subjects of philosophy, history, and she was in awe with the conversation they were having. But now, when Helen dies and when she receives the right treatment after the honors of the school. Ownership of the school get transferred to another person. She studies there and becomes teacher itself at Lowood. So Jane advertises her service and is hired as a governess for a young Adelaide Warnes, ward of Mr. Edward Rochester, the wealthy, dark-eyed commanding master of Thornfield. Thornfield is described with a Gothic atmosphere, dark, splendid, mysterious, absent master, cavernous interior, and a strange third floor from which unexplained laughter echoes. Jane frequently hears it, but is told it belonged to the servant Gracepool. Jane's first encounter with Rochester is on icy road where his horse sleeps. She hails him, knowing who he is. This sets the tone of their relationship. Jane hails her master while he hides his reality and real identity and history from her. Rochester is drawn to Jane's directness and equality of mind. He asks if she finds him handsome. She brutally says no, yet secretly admires his brilliant black eyes, which symbolizes his temper and inner power. So what happens? She joins as a governess to Adelaide Warrens. Adelaide Warrens is a ward of Edward Rochester in Thornfield Hall, and when she goes there, she experiences unexplained laughter coming from the third floor. And other servant advises her that this laughter is from a grace pool, one of the servant who behaves strangely. And and then she one like when she was walking, then she meet the Edward Rochester, the owner of the house, and they meet and they instantly get a fondness of each other. One night, Jane rescues Rochester from a fire in her bedroom. In his bedroom, the curtain set ablaze. This is revealed to be the work of the Rochester hidden secret on the third floor. Fire in the novel is the dominant symbol. It represents passion, danger, and uncontrolled emotion. Jane saves Rochester, but he continues to keep her in dark, blaming Grace Poole for all mysterious event. So uh, when Jane saves Rochester, he explains that it is because of the grace pool. He doesn't say anything much more than that, and he also explained to all other like workers or household there that it is because of the candle, and he says that it is because of the candle that lit the fire to the curtains. So when the Rochester brings a party of aristocrats, including the beautiful Blanche Ingram, Jane retreats to a corner wearing her Quakeress frock with blank floods blood leaves Rochester. Jane draws two contrasting portraits, a homely self-portrait and romantic image of Blanche to remind out herself of the class gap. I will say you कि Blanche Ingram is like then Rochester invites aristocrats, and then there comes Blanche Ingram. Blanche Ingram पसंद करती है Rochester को, and then she flirts with him. And what happens that Jane also is having a strong likeness towards Rochester. So वो सोचने लगती है कि we have a class gap, and she draws two portraits, a homely self-portrait and romantic image of blank. So she is also a great artist, but she somehow knows that there is a class gap, and she can't marry Rochester. Rochester confesses he has never intended to marry Blanche, and it was all played to make Jane jealous. He passionately proposes to Jane in the garden. Jane overwhelmed at first. He believes he's teasing her. When convinced, she accepts. But their union is immediately threatened. The same night, lightning splits the chestnut tree where they sat, a symbol of divine disapproval, foreshadowing the ruin ahead. Rochester's secrets will split up their marriage, just as lightning split the tree. So what happens that mm, Rochester was doing all this, playing all this because he know that Jane is in love with him. Earlier, back to this incident, there is one incident I will tell you. So Joe Rochester na, dresses up like a mm, gypsy woman, and he pretends to tell the fortune of the people. So करता क्या है वो कि he calls Blanche Ingram, फिर उसको बताता है कि नहीं नहीं तुमको जो लगता है रोचेस्टर उतना धनी नहीं है, and then he calls and then he calls this our heroine Jane Eyre, and and then she instantly recognizes him that he is Rochester, and then he reveals everything. Then that night, when they finally admire each other, they say that they love each other. The lightning splits, and it splits the chestnut tree into two halves, foreshadowing the event that the marriage is about to fall. So, during the engagement, Rochester showers Jane with expensive gifts. Jane resists, feeling objectified like his former mistress, Selena Warnes. She insisted on keeping her governess salary and plain dresses. I will not be your object of charity. I will keep the law given by God. Her self-respect comes from independence, not flattery. She privately writes to her uncle John Eyre, hoping an inheritance could make her closer to Rochester equal. So what happens that mm, she believes that, so she before this she also goes to her अर्लियर होम टू ऑन्ट टू जॉन रीड, एंड वहाँ पे वो जब जाती हैं तो उनको ये पता चलता है कि उनका जो भाई है जॉन रीड वो मर चुका है, उसने सुसाइड कर लिया डेप्थ में आके। उनकी दो कजिन्स हैं, डिफरेंट पाथ में चली गई हैं, एक तो बहुत रिलीजियस बन गई है और एक किसी अमीर आदमी से प्यार करती है। जॉन मिसेस रीड मरने की अवस्था में है, तो बताती है कि जो जॉन तुम्हारे जाने के बाद मतलब एक अंकल आए थे जॉन करके, उन्होंने तुमको ये वादा किया था कि तुमको वो अपना इनहेरिटेंस पूरा देंगे। उन्होंने ये वादा करके गया था। अब जेन जब इनसे शादी करती हैं रोचेस्टर से, तो उनको लगता है कि मैं और किसी मिस्ट्रेस जैसा ट्रीट नहीं होना चाहती थी। जैसे सेलिना वेरनेस जो फ्रांस में थी, जो कि एडेल की माता हैं, जब रोचेस्टर फ्रांस में गए थे तो उनको कुछ एक औरत मिली थी सेलिन वेरनेस, जिनके उनके साथ संबंध रहे थे, और उनको एक लड़की हुई थी एडले। बस एडले ने बोला था, एडले हाउएवर रोचेस्टर को लगता था कि एडले उनकी लड़की नहीं है और सेलिन किसी और के साथ सोई होगी, जिसकी वजह से उसको ये बच्ची हुई थी, पर सेलिन उस लड़की को अपनाती नहीं है, तो ये उसको यहाँ पे लेके चले आते हैं। तो ये पूरी कहानी वो बताते हैं उसको। और जेन आयरे सोचती है कि मैं पूरा इनहेरिटेंस इसलिए नहीं लूँगी क्योंकि मैं नहीं चाहती कि मैं इनके नीचे रहूँ और ये मेरे को फ्लैटरी और डॉल जैसे रखें। तो मैं बराबर ओहदे पे पहुँचना चाहती हूँ ताकि मेरे को एक इक्वल रिस्पेक्ट मिले। ये एक देखिए क्या है। सो अब क्या होता है कि जेन को एक सपना आता है। उस अपने सपने में देखती है कि स्ट्रेंज वाइल्ड वुमन विथ वाइल्ड हेयर इन हर रूम। बट रॉचेस्टर बोलते हैं उसको, ना ना तुम जेन में असलियत में ये इवेंट इंसिडेंट देखती है, बट रोचेस्टर बोलते नहीं नहीं तुमने सपना देखा था, सो जाओ। ऐसा बोल के उसको वो टाल देते हैं। जेन ऑलरेडी सेंसेस समथिंग इज डीपली रॉन्ग। सी टेल्स रोचेस्टर दैट he stood between me and every thought of religion as an eclipse intervenes between man and the broad sun. She has begun to worship Rochester like an ideal, placing him above God, which in Christian terms is dangerous sin that will require an eventual repentance. यहाँ पे फोरशेडिंग होती है, वो इतना प्यार करने लगी हैं रोचेस्टर से, इतना प्यार करने लगी हैं कि she has placed himself above everything. So, बर्था मेसन, the secret wife revealed। अब होती है एट द वेडिंग सेरेमनी में London lawyer Mr. Briggs. Mr. Briggs stands up and declared in the impediment. Rochester is already married. 15 years ago in Jamaica, he married Bertha Mason, a Creole woman from the West Indies whose family had hidden her hereditary insanity. Her brother, Mr. Mason, steps forward to confirm this. Rochester concedes the truth and take everyone to the third floor to see the Bertha Mason himself. फिर यहाँ पे बात आती है कि नहीं नहीं, ये रोचेस्टर तो ऑलरेडी शादी कर रखी है, तो वेस्ट इंडीज गया था, जमाइका में क्रियोल वुमन वेर्था मेसन से इसने शादी कर दी थी। बट रोचेस्टर ये कहता है कि मेरी शादी मेरे मेरी शादी गलती से कराई गई है, मेरे को नहीं पता था कि औरत पागल है, और लालच और धन के चक्कर में मेरे पिताजी ने मेरे को अपने जायदाद से बेदखल कर दिया था, मेरे भाई के नाम पूरा जायदाद कर दिया था, और मेरे को बोला था कि 30,000 तुम यूरोस के लिए तुम यहाँ पे शादी कर लो। तो मैंने वो शादी कर ली थी, और शुरू में तो मेरे को पता लगा कि वो अच्छी है, फिर बाद में पता लगा कि इसकी माँ पागल है और इसके अंदर भी पागलपन के दौरे हैं। और आप लोग खुद आके देख लीजिए थर्ड फ्लोर पे, जेन सीज बर्था फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम, द सोर्स ऑफ ऑल द लाफ्टर। उसको समझ में आ जाता है कि कहाँ से वो लाफ्टर आ रहा था। द फायर्स, द स्ट्रेंज नॉइसेस, एवरीथिंग, every puzzle starts to fit. Bertha is described in an animal rather than the human terms, reflecting Victorian prejudice against the foreigners and dehumanizing effect of the Rochester imprisonment on her. She attacks Rochester, he into wrestles her into the chair। फिर बर्था मेसन रोचेस्टर पे अटैक कर देती है, फिर वो बहुत मुशक्कत के बाद उसको वो चेयर पे डालता है। रोचेस्टर अपील्स टू जेन टू कम अवे with him anyway to southern France as his companion, though she still loves him deeply. Jane refuses to become his mistress. A mistress can never be an equal. Her self-respect, rooted in independence and Christian faith, wins over her love. She resolved, I care for myself, the moral solitary and the moral friendliness. The more I will respect myself, I will keep the law given by the God. So the law given by the God, she leaves Rochester finally. So that night, Jane's mother appears in her dream to tell her to flee temptation. Before drawing dawn, Jane slips away from the Thornfield. Thornfield से वो चली जाती है with her modest belonging। क्या है, को एक भी पैसा नहीं, with no plan but with her integrity intact। सो वहाँ से वो चली जाती है। जेन इज नाउ कम्प्लीटली अलोन एंड एक भी पैसा नहीं है। हैविंग लेफ्ट हर लगेज इन अ कोच, जिस कोच से वो आई थी उसमें भी लगेज भी छूट गया, तो अब तो इनके पास कुछ नहीं है। सी बेग्स एट द फॉर्म्स, बट उनको कोई नहीं अपने घर में घुसाता है, सब समझते हैं कि भिखारी है। बर्निंग विद सेम भी सी बिग्स फॉर लेफ्ट ओवर पॉडरेज, और जो बाड़ों में सुअरों को खाना देता था वो भी खाना वो खाने की कोशिश करती है। दिस इज द लोएस्ट पॉइंट इन द Jane's quest for independence. She is on her own, but independent on strangers' charity. Her wandering echoes the biblical trope of the wanderer of the wilderness. So weak and near death. अब समझ में आता है जेन एयर को, सी इज फाइनली गोइंग टू डाई। जेन फॉलो ए डिस्टेंट कैंडल टू द मूर हाउस। उनको एक मूर हाउस पे एक डिस्टेंस कैंडल दिखता है, उस लाइट को फॉलो करते करते वहाँ पहुँच जाती है। उस घर में 3 सिबलिंग्स रहते हैं, मैरी, डियाना एंड सेंट जॉन रिवर। सेंट जॉन रिवर जो पादरी का काम करने के लिए इंडिया जाना चाहते हैं, और मैरी डियान जो दोनों पढ़ाई करते हैं गवर्नेंस बनने के लिए और अमीर खानदान में जाके उनके वार्ड को पढ़ाने के लिए। द सर्वेंट हैना टर्न्स जेन अवे अ सस्पिशन बिगर। जेन collapses on the doorstep. This was the climax, a pang of exotic suffering. Oh, this isolation, the banishment of my kind. St. John arrives and carries her inside. She is saved by surrounding the Godwill. Jane recovers and quickly bonds with Mary and Diana, who shares her intellectual warmth. Uh, uh, St. John's, a stern clergyman, offers her to a position of running a village school for poor children in Morton. The job suits Jane. It makes her independent, modest, and respectable. She teaches not empty social convention but genuine virtues. Just as Mr. Temple, Helen Burns once taught her। लाइक 20 स्टूडेंट्स को वो पढ़ाती हैं जेन ऑयर, और मैरी एंड डियाना से वो अच्छे बॉन्ड कर लेती हैं और हमेशा से वो पढ़ाना चाहती है। तो सेंट जॉन क्लर्जी मैन उनको मॉर्टन में पुअर चिल्ड्रन को पढ़ाने को मौका देती है, तो उनके पास एक नया कुछ मिलता है, फ्रीडम मिलता है। स्ट्राइकिंग डिस्कवरी फॉलोज। इट लेटर रिवील्स दैट जेन अंकल्स आयर हैज डाइड एंड लेफ्ट हर फॉर्च्यून 20,000 मोर रिमार्केबली। सो ये जो 20,000 है, तो क्या होता है कि जॉन आयर जो है, जॉन आयर है, जो जेन का अंकल है वो इन लोगों का भी अंकल है। सेंट जॉन का अंकल है, मैरी और डायना का भी अंकल है, और जो जॉन आयर का अंकल, जो जॉन आयर है, जेन आयर का अंकल, इन लोगों पे अपनी संपत्ति देने के सिवा जेन आयर के नाम कर दिया। फिर जेन आयर क्या करती है कि ये संपत्ति सोचती है कि तीनों में इक्वली डिवाइड हो जाएगा, तो यहाँ पे ये चीज़ होती है। तो हम so now St. John River is ambitious and is very commanding and is very cold, and the novel's he's novel's second major protagonist, and he wants to do a missionary job in India, uh, and wants Jane to marry her. Before her, he liked someone and she rejected her, and she married someone. Now he wants Jane to marry her and do and go with his religious duties in India. He tells Jane his intentions, and he admires her usefulness. Okay, but she not admire her as a person. So Jane recognizes that marrying Saint John would mean self-annihilation. She tells him that she would go to India as his sister, not as his wife, but he refuses any compromise, and he also secretly loves beautiful Rosamund Oliver, but suppresses that feeling entirely, choosing heavenly reward over earthly happiness. So, two things happen. When Rosamund Oliver marries someone, he is very sure that he will do the work of the missionary, he will become a clergyman. So, and also he is in love with the Rosamund Oliver. So, when Rosamund Oliver marries someone, then he tries to force his thoughts towards the profession as a clergyman, and he forces Jane to come to accompany him to India for his work as a missionary to Christian religion को फैलाने के लिए. Basically, this contrasts sharply with the Jane who refuses to reject her feeling or her need for true love. Now, St. John's read evening prayer with such a commanding favor that Jane feels almost compelled to accept his proposal. His cold authority nearly overwhelms her. Now she is compelled to, just as Rochester's fiery passion once did, both men in a different ways. तभी वहाँ पे ना उनको कुछ रोचेस्टर की उसी शाम उनको रोचेस्टर की एक आवाज़ सुनाई देती है, जेन जेन जेन. फिर उनको लगता है कि दिस इज सम कॉलिंग, एंड देन शी मूव्स टू द थ्रोनफील्ड. Jane travels to Thornfield and find it burned to the ground. She learns from the local innkeeper that Bertha escaped, set fire to Jane's old bedroom, and jumped laughing from the roof to her death. Rochester saved all the servants, but severely injured in collapsing building. He lost a hand and his eyesight. How long lives in the modest woodland house. He now lives in the modest woodland Ferndale. Fire Bertha's uncontrolled passion, and now at last she unites with Rochester. At Ferndale, Jane sees Rochester in the yard, physically strong but with the face of a distressed sadness. He does not know she is there. Jane takes the place of his servants and bring him a glass of water. Their reunion is very tender and is very equal. Jane is now one who sees for him, literally and metaphorically, and Rochester is humbled by the God's punishment for his pride and arrogance. उसको लगता था उसके पास बहुत pride और arrogance था, that's why he's getting punished by the God. He prays regularly. Jane, now financially independent with her inheritance, returns to him for love alone, now dependence. She teases him playfully about St. John, using jealousy to lift his spirit. Rochester proposes again and joyfully accept, reader, I married him. और फिर द मैरिज इज़ वेरी इक्वल, एंड जेन ऑल्सो रेस्क्यूज एडले फ्रॉम द बोर्डिंग स्कूल, और वो अपने घर के पास एडले को रख देती है और वो फाइनली शादी कर लेती है. तो यहाँ पे नोवेल ख़त्म हो जाता है. उम्मीद करता हूँ आप लोगों को नोवेल पसंद आई. थैंक यू वेरी मच.